Hi everybody, welcome back to my channel. Today I want to talk to you about the books I've read recently in February that don't have their own dedicated video for one reason or another. We'll start with the books that I liked, the good books, and we'll move towards the books that I didn't like, the bad or the ugly, or however you want to describe it. First and most successfully for this month, I finally read The Kind Worth Killing by Peter Swanson. This book has been on my TBR for quite a while, and if it wasn't for a good deal on the Audible audiobook, I probably still would have not read it, considering my schedule these days. This is also the first book that I've ever read by Peter Swanson. It won't be my last. I really enjoyed this book. It's a 4-star read for me completely. It's the story of a married man named Ted who is traveling, and in the airport he meets a woman named Lily. As Ted and Lily start to get to know each other, he starts confiding in her things that you wouldn't typically tell a stranger, like he's pretty sure his wife is cheating on him with their contractor, and while most strangers would just dole out some sympathy and maybe a similar story of their own, Lily actually takes it to a place where she and Ted end up talking about killing his wife and the man that she's cheating on him with. It is completely as twisted as it sounds, but there's way more to this book than it also sounds. This is a twisty and shocking and crazy ride through the minds of 4 different people, and well, actually through the minds of 5 different people. There ends up being narrative sections of this book from 5 people. Nobody in this book is good. Nobody in this book is without fault or flaw, and it's one of those books where there's all of these events and pieces of information, and a story told from one person's perspective isn't necessarily the way that events unfolded. And it's just a really enjoyable, fun, twisty book. I don't know how else to explain it. It was shocking in parts. Definitely one of those books that raises all those moral questions that I love, right? Because I've already said none of these characters are good people. And as things happen, though, you still find yourself cheering for one bad person over another bad person. And it's really fascinating. The other thing that I loved about this book is the way that it ended. I'm not going to tell you how it ended, but just know that I love the hint of an ending. I love it when you've watched the entire story play out and you've been privy to certain secrets of the characters, and because of that knowledge, the way that the book actually ends, you know what's going to happen even though it doesn't happen in the book. Does that make any sense at all? It's an ending that hints at a massive occurrence that's going to take place, but you're not going to get to be there to see it. I love that kind of ending for a thriller. This is a really good book, and I have other books on my shelves by Peter Swanson that I can't wait to read now. Another pretty good book that I read in the month of February, I don't have a physical copy of it. I did listen to the audiobook. It is called Her One Mistake. It's by Heidi, and it actually is a January 2019 release. It is a story that takes place in England about 2 friends, Charlotte and Harriet. Charlotte is sort of this outgoing social woman that a lot of people would envy, and has this sort of not perfect life, but she definitely, has a lot going for her. She's sort of befriended the opposite in Harriet, who is this quiet, not antisocial, but just like keeps to herself. She's definitely secretive. She's shy. She doesn't put herself out there. Her one and only friend is Charlotte. Charlotte has three children, and Harriet only has 1 daughter. And so one day, uncharacteristically, Harriet allows Charlotte to take her daughter Alice to the school fair so that she can take a business class. And while Charlotte has Alice, Alice disappears. At that point, the story becomes about she's just crucified by people who claimed to be her friends, by people in the media, by Harriet and her husband. Harriet kicks herself and suffers all of this guilt for allowing her child to be cared for by another the one time, and her child disappears. It's really sort of one of those books that you just you kind of can't help but to like put yourself in either woman's shoes, and both are very uncomfortable and cringeworthy places to exist, and you feel bad for both of these women. On one hand, you definitely understand how something like that could happen, and on the other hand, you're like, how could you let that happen? So it's a really entertaining book in that it's not at all what it seems, and there are some really good twists and some really unexpected things that come up. And it's a book that it's entertaining, it's suspenseful, it's surprising in its twists, and it's got a really satisfactory sort of ending, even though it's not by any stretch of the imagination a happy ending for anyone. And so far it's doing really well on Goodreads with over a 4-star rating, so I'm gonna have to add my 4-star rating to the pile. The next book I'm really gonna struggle with. It is Year One, the first book in the Chronicles of the One series by Nora Roberts. I don't have a rating for you here because I feel like this book is so out of context right now, because it is book one out of a series that, to my knowledge thus far, is a trilogy. But that might not be the case. I don't know. Book 2 is out. Book 3 has a release date. And that's as far as we've gotten. Completely not what I would ever assume or know to be true about Nora Roberts. This is an apocalyptic story about a guy who kills a bird and ends the world, basically. There's a man who is vacationing for the Christmas holiday in Scotland, and on a hunting expedition kills, I don't even remember what kind of bird it is, but it just sets off this plague that runs through the entire world super fast and kills off billions of people. The actual story is about the survivors, obviously. It reminds me a lot of The Walking Dead, especially around season 5 and Alexandria and that whole thing, because the story is about different groups of people coming together and sort of trying to live. The unique thing about this particular apocalypse is that it sort of enhances the magical talents of the people that are left. I mean, there's all kinds of stuff in this, but I mean, you've got elves and fairies and witches, and you've got white magic and black magic, and it ends up being a war between the two. And in the midst of it, you've got regular human survivors who, either fall into alliance with the good, magically inclined folks, or become very bigoted and, are real dicks about anybody who has a supernatural ability. I really liked this book, and I do want to continue in the series, and unfortunately, until I do, I can't really say how I feel about it in a star rating sort of a way, because while I like this book, the things that I like about it feel like they're over. We spend a lot of time getting to know a very large amount of characters, and I've become connected to all of these characters in this book that are not very relevant by the time this book wraps up. Nora Roberts has sort of built up these people as main characters, but there's nothing about the ending of this book or the synopsis of the second book that leads me to believe I'm ever going to see these people again, these people that I came to really like. And so don't get me wrong, it'll still be a very interesting story with the people that remain at the moment this book ends, but I know those other characters are out there alive, and I just want to know if we're ever going back to that place. Like, those are the people that I really am interested in where that story goes. I'm interested what happens to those other people as well, or what role they play in the protection or what have you of the one. I guess that's my answer. You know, as its own book, it's not that successful to me because it feels like we learn about and hear about all of these characters and events and places and people that don't end up having real relevance when that particular book ends. So yeah, I guess as its own kind of book, it's not successful. I'm hoping that the subsequent books save it. I'm hoping that there is a purpose for all of those things we heard about and learned about and read about in the first book. If they just existed to make this enough to be a book one of a trilogy or of a series, that's not going to work for me. Lastly, we have another book that sat on my TBR shelf for a really long time. This is The Life We Bury by Eskins. I was really attracted to this book when I bought it a long time ago. It's the story of a college student who has an assignment to write a biography and ends up gaining access to a convicted rapist and murderer. And so he chooses to write about that individual's life. Here's the thing though. This is really only a 3-star read for me, and considering it's the last book in my recent reads list, not too bad. 3 stars. Okay. It wasn't a terrible reading month. That's basically what that means. So Joe is our college student who's interviewing Carl, the man convicted of raping and murdering a 14-year-old girl. And to me, I just really wanted to hear about Carl. I wanted this story to be about the person that Joe is interviewing the person that Carl is. And I knew that if it was that kind of story, it was a little bit of a departure from the books that I typically read. But that's okay. You know, I was just fascinated with where that story would go. Turns out, this story isn't really a successful literary fiction, and it's not a successful thriller. It tries to be both. And if it had just picked a side, it would have been a way better book. It sort of tries to turn itself into a thriller. Joe starts to doubt the guilt of Carl Iverson and sets out to prove that Carl was wrongly convicted, and in doing so encounters dangerous people and gets wrapped up in this mystery that, quite frankly, is way above his capability as this college student on his own. In telling that story, Eskins kind of threw in very stereotypical or cliche thriller elements. And so if I was judging this book as a thriller, I would be disappointed because it doesn't do anything new. It doesn't do anything interesting. Meanwhile, you've got really amazing characters in this book, like Joe, who, you know, is from a single parent home where the single parent is completely unreliable. He has an autistic brother that he feels both responsible for and yet guilty for leaving with the mother. There's an assault survivor that lives in his building and they form a relationship, you know, and then there's Carl Iverson, the man, the Vietnam veteran who was accused and convicted of a very heinous crime and who actually maintains his innocence. So, I mean, there's a lot there to tell. You don't need those thriller elements. You can exist solely on all of these characters and circumstances that have been established and actually have a really heartfelt book instead of a cliched metamorphosis of a book that ends up ruining it for both potentials. The potential of being a character-driven literary fiction and the potential for being an exciting thriller. And I'm glad that I read it, number one, because it's been sitting there taunting me as a book that I would really want to read. I'm glad that I've accomplished finishing it. I'm also glad that I read it because it did introduce me to Alan Eskins, and I believe this was his debut. Best first novel. Like, he won a lot of awards for this being a best first novel or a best debut mystery, etc. So this was Alan Eskins' first novel, and so I'm comfortable with the introduction to Alan Eskins and maybe seeing what else he's managed to write. He's written a ton of books, I believe, since. And so I'm definitely not counting Alan Eskins out as a future author to read. I just got something out of this that I wasn't expecting, and it disappointed a little bit when that was revealed. Let me know if you've read any of the books that I mentioned today, or if you think you might want to read the books that I mentioned and you have maybe some more questions about them. I'm doing my best to respond to all comments that I receive, and also trying to be more active on Instagram, which I have to say, since having the twins, the social media aspect of this booktube thing has suffered the most, I think. But I'm trying, I really am. So bear with me. I appreciate every single one of you for sticking around and hanging in there and watching my vids and taking the time to let me know your thoughts. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you all very soon.